Pyong. Jin Jianwu's eyes were red and bloodshot as if the veins in his eyes were about to burst. He looked at Seo Munpyong's body with eyes that seemed ready to spill blood at any moment. The image of Seo Munpyong lying on the floor with his head separated from his body felt too unrealistic. Jin Jianwu had to spend a considerable amount of time accepting his death. It was the same for Nung Son and Wan Jiayang. Seo Munpyong was still a member of their organization, the Golden Heavenly Hall. Not only Nung Son, who had always cared for him from the start, but even Wan Jiayang, who hated him for being a bastard, could not help but feel sorry for his death. How dare you kill Pyong? Oh my god! Nung Son's eyes were as red and bloodshot as Jin Jianwu. Nung Son was proud of his ability to stay rational and calm no matter the circumstances, but at this moment, his head was blank and he couldn't think of anything. Only uncontrollable anger filled his head. His anger was great enough to blow away all of his remaining rationality. Ah! Nung Son let out a roar and rushed in. Before he knew it, he had a sword in his hands. Sight. A sword reminiscent of the white moon filled everyone's vision. Nung Son executed his best technique, the 18 White Moon Sword Style. Point 1. The 18 White Moon Sword Style is one of the highest-ranking techniques in Jianghu. This is because the said technique is said to be capable of crushing even the largest boulders at once. His nickname, the White Moon Sword, was also derived from the 18 White Moon Sword Style. No. Jin Jianwu belatedly tried to stop the advance of Nung Son, but the latter's moon-like swordsmanship continued to mercilessly send numerous strikes towards Piawul's direction. The formidable power of his attacks caused a thick layer of dust to rise and obscured his vision. Still, Nung Son was not relieved and tried to strike once again using his sword. It was that moment. Cit. Something flew through the dust. Nung Son avoided the flying object with his superhuman sense. Flying sword? It was definitely a flying sword that passed by Nung Son. If he had been a little late in dodging the flying weapon, his throat would have been cut. Nung Son ran forward, wary that another flying sword would come flying again. Piawul is still alive and well. The flying sword that had just flown towards his direction proved that fact. Nung Son raised the senses of his whole body to the maximum. Sight. All of a sudden, he felt a tingling sensation at the back of his head. The flying sword that had recently passed by him drew a U-turn in the air and aimed for the back of his head. What? When Nung Son became flustered at the unexpected trajectory of the flying sword, Wan Jiayang quickly moved. Huh. As if to prove that she is the disciple of the famous swordsman Han Yuqian, she performed a brilliant sword technique and struck the dagger that was heading towards the back of Nung Son's head. Kang. Wan Jiayang's intervention dramatically saved his life, but Nung Son felt the hairs all over his body stand up. Quarak. The flying sword, which had been deflected by Wan Jiayang's sword, was being dragged into the dust like a thread being rewound on a spinning wheel. But it was too early for them to feel relieved. Sight. Cit. This time, 2 flying swords came out. The flying sword, which moved and attacked Nung Son and Wan Jiayang, was like a living creature that has its own will. This. HCK. The two freaked out and swung their swords to block the incoming flying swords. Jin Jianwu still didn't move and just observed the flying swords, which attacked 2 of his colleagues. At first glance, it seemed like the flying sword was moving on its own. Is it sword qi? No. 2. Jin Jianwu immediately denied his thoughts. As he injected qi into his eyes, he could see the thread of the qi connected to the 2 flying swords. The qi is condensed and used like a thread. It was a skill that he had never heard of. Operating qi to that kind of degree would require delicate sense and deep internal energy that ordinary people cannot imagine. Jin Jianwu is also proud of his deep internal energy, but he could not dare imitate such a delicate maneuvering of qi. It wasn't just Jin Jianwu. No other warrior in Jianghu can confidently operate qi like a thread. Jin Jianwu did not even have a clue on how such an operation was even possible. Kagagogging. Traditional swords and flying swords collided continuously. Nung Son and Wan Jiayang were having trouble dealing against a skill they have never heard of before. The flying sword was like a viper. It was persistent and tenacious in targeting their weakest parts. Because of that, the two of them could not even approach Pyoul. Just dealing with the flying swords already made them exhausted. Noon Son, who could not stand it, shouted loudly. "Come out, you cowardly bastard!" That was then. Puuk. He felt a sharp pain in his shoulder blade. He looked at the object that wrapped around his shoulders. Its form was faintly visible. Thread? At that moment, his body was dragged away. Hyuk. Nung Son let out a gasp, without realizing it. Brother Son. When Wan Jiayang was about to throw herself away to save Nung Son, Puk. Something came through her ankle and wrapped around her shin. At the moment Wan Jiayang felt the pain, she also fell off like Nung Son. Arg! She screamed. The experience of being pulled over by an external force rather than by one's own will was truly terrifying. Sayat. At that moment, a flying sword came down falling from the air towards her and Nung Son. Pyoul used the soul-reaping thread to both subdue Nung Son and Wan Jiayang and control the ghost daggers. With Pyoul using the soul-reaping threads in two different ways, its utility increased tenfold. Wan Jiayang shut her eyes tightly as she saw the ghost dagger flying towards her. But before that could happen, Jin Jianwu already pulled out his sword and jumped into the air. He couldn't stand to see his colleagues be in danger any longer. Stop it! His body plunged to the floor at a frightening speed after reaching the apex of his jump. He was now halfway in between Pyoul and Wan Jiayang. 9-ring heavenly sword, 3 the third type of his light soul technique. 4. Bang. His sword, which contained a great amount of internal energy, was thrust down on the ground like a meteor. A storm swept through the area, and the soul-reaping threads, which had tied up Wan Jiayang and Nung Son, were quickly cut off. After the two were set free, they avoided the ghost daggers. They were only able to dodge it by a narrow margin. Quarak. The soul-reaping thread which was tied to the ghost dagger was rewound and recovered by Pyoul. Huff. Huff. Ha, hia. Nung Son and Wan Jiayang, who barely managed to preserve their lives, let out a rough breath. They looked at the place where the ghost dagger was recovered. As the dust settled, the figure of the Pyoul was revealed. Pyoul was still in the same place where he first stood. He did not move even a single step while dealing with the young experts such as Wan Jiayang and Nung Son. For a moment, their faces were contorted in shame. Hike. Feeling humiliated, Nung Son tried to attack Pyoul again. But Jin Jianwu raised his hands to restrain him. Nung Son shouted, "Jin! Hold it in. We need to get revenge for Pyong." "How can I do that?" Nung Son was ready to rush towards Pyoul at any moment. Wan Jiayang also held his hand. "You need to put up with it, even you? We're no match for him." As you can see, he didn't move a single step. Cook. Leave it to brother Jianwu. A terrible expression befell Wan Jiayang's face. She also finds it difficult to stand still. She is the disciple of the swordsman Han Yuqian, who is said to be the best swordsman in the world. So she took pride in her skills. But not one of the sword techniques taught by her master was even put to use since she was constantly on the defensive. So if she can, she wants to have a life-and-death battle with Pyoul to show off her prowess regardless of the consequence. However, she had no choice but to endure it because she knew that it would only hinder Jin Jianwu if she rushed ahead. Pyoul and Jin Jianwu looked at each other. Pyoul lost Su Yang to Xiao Munpyong, and Jin Jianwu lost Xiao Munpyong to Pyoul. Their relationship took an irreparable blow. To others, Xiao Munpyong may be a selfish villain, but to Jin Jianwu, Xiao Munpyong was a good younger brother. It was absolutely impossible for him to overlook Xiao Munpyong's death. Nevertheless, Jin Jianwu endured. He was different from Nung Son and Wan Jiayang. He had a brilliant brain and eyes which could see through the truth of a situation. And he was clearly aware of his priorities. Jin Jianwu opened his mouth while keeping Pyeongwoo in check. Let's put our grudges on hold for the meantime. Why should I do that? Shouldn't our priority be catching the main culprit who made things like this? We can deal with our problem after we catch him. Or else, he'll be out of Chengdu while we're busy facing each other like this. And if I don't agree? Then I'll fight you with all my might. I might win, or you might win, but whoever wins won't be able to catch the one who killed her. Are you still all right with that? Jin Jianwu's polite speech did not show any servility. In his heart, he also wanted to fight against Pyeongwoo with all his might. But if they do so now, it was clear that they would be far from catching the culprit who caused all of these things to happen. Pyeongwoo looked at Jin Jianwu. Jin Jianwu did not avoid his gaze. There was a suffocating silence between the two of them. The confrontation between the two was so intense that Won Jie-young and Nung Son even felt like the space around them was being distorted. Suddenly, Pyeongwoo looked at Su-hyang's body lying on the floor. Even at the moment she died, she had a comfortable expression, as if she wasn't in pain. Pyeongwoo carefully hugged Su-hyang's body. Who? It was then that Jin Jianwu exhaled the breath that he had been holding back. He interpreted Pyeongwoo's actions as a sign of accepting his proposal. Even as Su-hyang lost her breath, she still looked beautiful. Anyone who would look at her might think that she was just sleeping and that she would wake up anytime soon. At that time, the courtesans of Divine Fragrance Pavilion who survived the fiasco came to Pyeongwoo crying. Madam! Sister! In front of Su-hyang's body, they burst into tears that they had been holding back. Su! It's because of you. Some courtesans spit and cursed at Seo Munpyeong's decapitated body. The reason why the Divine Fragrance Pavilion was in shambles, and why Su-hyang and the other men died was because of the disturbance caused by Seo Munpyeong. If it hadn't been for him, all of them would have been having a good time as usual. It was regrettable that they couldn't kick Seo Munpyeong's head because Jin Jianwu and the others were looking at them. Nung Son and Won Jie-young turned their heads away from the courtesans. Seeing the behavior of the courtesans towards Seo Munpyeong made their heart feel heavy. Only then did they realize what Seo Munpyeong had done. Even if he was possessed by Hukum of the Xiaolian Temple, he could not be an excuse for what he had done. Damn it! Huh! How did this? The two could not bear to look directly at the courtesans. Pyeongwoo said to Dan Seol, who was the second oldest courtesan after Su-hyang. From now on, you will be the one in charge of the Divine Fragrance Pavilion. Yes. Bury Su-hyang's body in a sunny place. All right. Dan Seol wiped away her tears and nodded her head. She was very close with Su-hyang. That's why, when Su-hyang said that she was going to set up the Divine Fragrance Pavilion, she joined without hesitation. Su-hyang usually discussed her plans on how to run the Divine Fragrance Pavilion with Dan Seol. So Pyeongwoo thought that Dan Seol would be able to manage the Divine Fragrance Pavilion well if she had no prior experience. Dan Seol held Su-hyang's body in her arms and said, "You don't have to worry about the Divine Fragrance Pavilion anymore. You can just focus on what you have to do. We will protect the Divine Fragrance Pavilion. You can trust us." The courtesans each said a word to Pyeongwoo. Pyeongwoo turned around without saying a word. Jin Jianwu asked, "How are you going to find the culprit?" "It's not that hard to find him." "What?" "The real difficulty is figuring out his background." Jin Jianwu's eyes widened at Pyeongwoo's unexpected answer. "Background? Are you talking about the Xiaolian Temple?"